She was 19 with nowhere to go. No family left standing, no savings account, nothing but a backpack and whatever she'd managed to stash in a coffee can over the years. For $10, she bought a rusted houseboat lashed to a forgotten dock on a backwater inlet deep in southern Louisiana. The hull took on water. The cabin walls were soft with rot. The marina owner told her she'd be lucky if the thing held above the waterline for 30 days. But what no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that beneath the deck of that rotting vessel, sealed inside a compartment no one had touched in over 4 decades, was something that would rewrite everything she understood about her own life. Before we go further, if stories like this one land somewhere real for you, hit subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. June Prescott had been drifting toward water her entire life and never once realized it. She came into the world in a small town in central Mississippi, the kind of place where the closest water was a muddy stock pond and the nearest river sat 40 miles down the road. But she'd been sketching boats since her fingers could grip a crayon. Her mother kept every drawing in a folder tucked inside the kitchen drawer. Crayon boats, marker boats, pencil sketches with crooked masts and stick-figure sailors leaning over the rails. By 9 years old, that folder was an inch thick. Her mother died when June was 11. Brain aneurysm. On Tuesday, she was standing at the stove making dinner. By Thursday, she was in the ground. June's father, a quiet man named Cal, who worked maintenance at the high school, did his best. That was the phrase the whole town used about him, always delivered with the same tone of sympathetic resignation. He did his best. He showed up to school functions. He packed her lunches. Never once raised his voice. But after his wife died, something inside Cal went dark. Not all at once, gradually. The way a fire dies, ember by ember, until what remains is grey and cold and gives off no heat at all. By the time June turned 17, her father was a shell occupying a chair. He still clocked in at the school, still came home, ate dinner, watched the news. But he was unreachable. She would speak to him and he'd nod, answer in fragments, stare past her at something only he could see. Eventually she stopped trying. It hurt less to quit than to keep failing at it. At 16, she landed a job at a small marine supply store outside Jackson, an hour from her town by bus. The shop sold boat parts, fishing tackle, life jackets, coils of rope. Everything in there smelled like salt water, even though the nearest salt water was 200 miles south. The owner was an older man named Thad, former Coast Guard rescue swimmer in his 20s. He took an interest in June, not out of pity, but because she genuinely wanted to learn. She memorized the parts catalogues. She taught herself the difference between marine epoxy and the regular stuff. She learned what a stuffing box was, what a bilge pump did, why fiberglass needed gel coat. She learned that ropes become lines the moment they touch a boat, that everything aboard has a specific name, that names matter because in an emergency there is no time to point. Thad gave her things her father no longer could. He taught her to splice a line, read a tide chart, identify a vessel by its hull shape alone. He taught her that a boat is a system, and any system can be repaired if you understand how it functions. And understanding systems, he told her, is the most valuable skill a human being can possess. Because everything is a system. Houses, cars, people, weather, money. See the system, fix the system, can't see it, and you're at its mercy. June saved every dollar that Marine Supply paycheck put in her hands. She kept the money in a coffee can shoved to the back of her closet, an old Folgers tin that still carried a faint ghost of grounds no matter how many times she wiped it out. By 18, she had $880. By 19, $1,140. Her father died on her 19th birthday, heart attack. He was sitting in his recliner watching the evening news. June found him when she walked in from work. The television was still on. He looked peaceful, which was a strange thing to feel grateful for. But she felt it anyway. He hadn't suffered. He had simply stopped, the way she'd been watching him stop for 8 years. Only now it was final. The house wasn't hers. The house belonged to a man called Barclay. He owned 3 properties in town and rented them to tenants who paid on time and kept their mouths shut. After the funeral, Barclay gave June 2 weeks. He wasn't cruel about it, said his own daughter needed the place. Rent was covered through month's end, and that was all he could offer. June nodded. She'd seen it coming. She boxed up Cal's belongings for goodwill, kept his old wool fishing sweater and a framed photograph of her mother and him from 1998, then packed what remained of her own life into a backpack and a duffel bag. The morning the lease ran out, she walked through the door with her bags and her coffee can, stood on the porch, looked at that door for a long, quiet moment before pulling it shut. The bus to Jackson departed at 9:15. The connection from Jackson to Baton Rouge left at 11:40. June had been turning Louisiana over in her mind for months. Thad had a brother who ran a marine repair shop on the bayou outside Homer. More than once, Thad had told her, if she ever wanted to learn boats from the inside out, his brother would teach her. She'd never intended to take him up on it. But standing in the Jackson bus station with everything she owned in 2 bags and $1,128 rattling in that coffee can, she understood there was nothing else left to aim for. She bought the ticket. The ride south stretched on. Mississippi bled into Louisiana as the ground went flat and the air thickened, turned wet against the skin. The trees shifted, oaks surrendering to cypress and tupelo, roots standing in black water like the legs of patient animals. Spanish moss draped from the branches in long grey curtains. June watched all of it through the glass with the kind of focus she reserved for things she was trying to burn into memory. A place she had never set foot in, but had always somehow recognized. The way you know the shape of a word in a language you've never spoken. She reached Homer at dusk. The bus station was a small concrete box beside a gas station. Thad's brother was waiting. A man named Walker, who looked exactly like Thad but wore a beard, leaning against a dented Ford F250. He didn't talk much on the drive to the shop. One hand on the wheel, one elbow hanging out the window, letting the warm, wet evening do the conversation. The shop sat on a backwater inlet, roughly 10 miles from town. Open-sided wooden structure under a corrugated metal roof with a small dock reaching out into dark water. A handful of boats lined the dock. A fishing skiff, a cabin cruiser trailing weeds along its hull, an aluminum John boat, and at the far end, listing slightly to port, an old houseboat. Walker pointed. That's what I wanted to show you. Old Tilden Boudreau's place. Died last year. No family. Thad said you might be looking for something. June walked the length of the dock to see it. 30 feet, give or take. Steel hull. Originally painted white, now mostly rust with raw metal showing through in patches. The cabin perched on top, a flat-roofed wooden box with turquoise paint curling away from the grain. 2 small windows on each side, a weathered wooden door facing the dock. A crooked life ring hung from the railing, its rope rotted but still holding on. The whole vessel sat low, heavy with whatever filled its belly and whatever water had crept in through the hull over the years. But she could read the lines. She could see what this boat had been. Steel hull meant it could be patched, sanded, painted. Wood cabin meant it could be rebuilt plank by plank if that's what it took. The shape was right, low, stable, made for slow water, for floating, not racing. The kind of boat that didn't need to go anywhere because it was already exactly where it belonged. __quote_0__June asked. Walker scratched his beard. Quote 1, $10. June pulled out her coffee can, counted 10 $1 bills onto Walker's open palm. He studied the money, studied her, nodded slow. You know how to caulk a seam? He asked. Yes. You know how to mix marine epoxy? You know what to do if you find a hull breach below the waterline? Pump the bilge, find the source, patch from the outside if possible, from the inside if not, using thickened epoxy and a wood backer. Walker smiled for the first time. "Thad told me you knew your stuff." "I didn't buy it." He placed a key in her hand. "Sleep on it tonight. We start at dawn." June stepped onto the houseboat that evening as the sun dropped behind the cypress trees, painting the bayou in 100 shades of orange and gold. The deck groaned beneath her but held firm. She turned the lock on the cabin door and pushed it wide. Inside, a single room, 10 feet by 12 maybe. A built-in bunk ran along one wall, the mattress rotted through and stained dark. A tiny galley with a propane stove corroded past any hope of use. One table, 2 folding chairs, cabinets lining the walls mostly bare. The wood bloated from years of Louisiana humidity. The air carried mildew, old fabric, and that faint sweet decay that water-damaged wood develops after enough seasons. The place was a wreck, but it floated, and it belonged to her. June dropped her bags on the table and stood in the center of the cabin, turning slow. She could feel the hull shifting beneath her feet, a soft rocking from the wake of a fish breaking the surface outside. The walls pressed close, the ceiling hung low. Light came through the small windows, dim, green gold, watery. The color of sun strained through bayou water and Spanish moss. Something about it settled into her bones. She couldn't name it. Maybe it was the rocking, the way the floor breathed like a living thing. Maybe it was the tightness, the containment, every surface close enough to touch. Maybe it was simply that this was her first boat. After all those years sketching hulls and stocking marine parts and reading repair manuals at the kitchen table while her father Cal sat staring at the evening news. Whatever it was, June felt it the way you feel a key slide into a lock you never knew existed. She slept on the floor that first night, zipped into her sleeping bag, the ruined mattress shoved against the wall. The bayou outside hummed with sounds she'd never encountered, frogs singing in layered chorus, owls calling across the cypresses, the slow, patient lap of water against steel. A splash. Could have been a fish, could have been an alligator. She lay awake a long while, just listening. And somewhere in those hours, fear drained out of her. What replaced it felt like being held. Walker arrived at 6 the next morning, carrying 2 coffees and a bag of beignets from a spot down the road. They sat on the dock, ate, and mapped out what had to happen. The list stretched long. Hull needed patching, sanding, fresh paint. Cabin needed gutting and rebuilding from the studs out. Plumbing, non-existent. Electrical, suspect at best. Propane system, a fire waiting to happen. Bilge pump, seized solid. 6 months if you do it proper, Walker said. Could be longer. You can live aboard while you work, but it won't be comfortable. I can handle uncomfortable. She started that same day with the bilge. The bilge is the lowest cavity in any vessel, the space beneath the floorboards where water pools, where gear gets stashed, where mold and rot and forgotten things collect if nobody tends them. She pried open the hatch in the cabin floor and peered down. Dark water sat 6 inches deep. She bailed it by hand, coffee can into bucket, bucket over the side, bent double in the cramped space. 2 hours of that. When the water was gone, she aimed her flashlight into the emptied bilge. Something sat on the bottom. A wooden footlocker. Old. The kind soldiers once carried to war. Brass corners gone dark with tarnish, leather straps, a heavy padlock. It rested on a small wooden platform, purpose-built to rise above the waterline. Whoever placed it there had wanted it kept dry. The platform had gone soft with rot over the years, but the footlocker itself looked solid. Brass tarnished but intact. Leather straps stiff but whole. Padlock rusted shut. June stared at it for a long beat. Then she hauled herself out of the bilge and went looking for Walker. He followed her back. Looked down at the footlocker. Looked at June. Ran a hand through his beard. Tilden was a peculiar man, he said. 3 tours in Vietnam with the United States Marines. came back and spent the next 40 years living on this boat, never took a wife, worked as a mechanic over in Homer, saved every dollar he earned, spent almost none of it. Folks always wondered where his money went. Nobody ever asked because Tilden wasn't the type of man you questioned. He went quiet. I think we just figured out where it all went. Together they hauled the footlocker up from the bilge, heavy. Surprisingly heavy, the way old wooden chests get when they're packed with metal. They set it on the deck, and Walker handed June a hacksaw. Quote, 10, quote, he said, quote, 11, quote. June sawed through the rusted padlock. It dropped to the deck with a flat metallic clunk. She unlatched the leather straps, lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay rows of small canvas bags. Each one was cinched with a length of twine and marked with a date, faded ink on a paper tag. The earliest read 1979, the latest 2018, the year before Tilden died. 40 years of bags. June picked one up. It had real weight. She worked the twine loose and opened it. Coins. Old silver coins. Walking Liberty $half, Morgan silver dollars, Mercury dimes. Dozens of them packed tight inside the canvas. She opened another. More coins. A third. This one held paper money, old bills folded in half and bound with a rubber band. A fourth held a mix. A fifth, nothing but dimes. A sixth, nothing but quarters. 43 bags in that footlocker. One for every year between 1979 and 2018, except 1985 and 1992. Those were missing. Each bag held whatever Tilden had managed to set aside that year. Some years weighed more than others. The bag from 1981 was nearly empty. The one from 2003 was so stuffed the seams were splitting. June counted every last piece. It took 2 days. Walker assisted with the coin appraisals. He knew a dealer in Thibodeau who drove out, examined the silver content, and gave her honest figures. The total, coins and bills combined, came to $48,200. Beneath the final canvas bag, at the very bottom of the footlocker, lay a folded American flag and a sealed envelope. The envelope was addressed in shaky, spidery handwriting. To whoever finds this. June broke the seal and read, ___, quote, _12, ___. June read it through twice. Then she folded it with care, slid it back into the envelope, and sat on the deck of the houseboat as morning sun broke over the bayou. Cypresses threw long shadows across the water. She didn't cry, but her throat had closed up tight, and she thought about her mother and her father and Tilden Boudreau and every person she had ever loved and lost. And she understood something, for the first time in her whole life, that being lost and being found were not opposites. They were the same condition, separated only by time. If this story means something to you, take a second and subscribe. It helps us keep telling stories like this one. And leave a comment. Have you ever discovered something on the water that changed how you saw your own life? Walker drove her to Homer the next morning to open a bank account. The dented F250 rattled into the parking lot, and he waited outside while she walked in carrying the canvas bags stuffed into a paper grocery sack. The teller was a young woman close to June's age, who glanced at the contents and immediately called for the manager. The manager, a Cajun woman in her 50s named Therese, studied June with careful eyes and asked if she could explain. June handed her Tilden's letter. Therese read it slow, her finger tracing each line. Then she handed the paper back and said, "You take care of that boat share. Tilden was a good man." June put a portion of the money toward doing the job properly. Over the next 8 months, she rebuilt the houseboat side by side with Walker in his shop, absorbing everything he could teach her about hull repair, marine carpentry, electrical systems. The hull came first. They pulled the boat from the water on a winch rig Walker had constructed years before, easing it up onto heavy wooden blocks in the yard behind the shop. On dry land, the houseboat looked worse than June had imagined. Rust pitted the steel along the entire waterline. Below it, she found 2 spots that had been patched once before, decades ago, with sheet metal screwed into place. A fast, careless fix. The patches held. Barely. She sanded the whole hull down to bare metal with a power sander, hour after hour, arms trembling by the end of every session. The noise was punishing, and the grit got into everything. Her ears hummed through the night, even with foam plugs stuffed deep. Her shoulders burned so badly she could hardly lift them above her head when she crawled into her sleeping bag. But she did not stop. Day after day the rust fell away, and bare steel emerged beneath it, dull silver in early light, warming to bronze under the afternoon sun. 2 weeks in, the hull was clean. She ground out the remaining rust with a wire brush attachment, treated each spot with phosphoric acid to convert what was left into inert iron phosphate. Then she applied marine epoxy to the worst sections, building up the surface with thickened resin, layer by careful layer. Walker taught her to feather the edges so each patch blended smooth into the surrounding steel. He showed her the right consistency for the epoxy mix. Not too thin, not too thick. The way you mix peanut butter and jelly for a sandwich, he said, until it stays where you put it. She started with the bow because the bow was worst. When she got it right, she did the rest the same way. 2 coats of epoxy primer went on next. White, grey, dense, the kind that bonds to steel like skin. Then 3 coats of marine enamel in a deep, dark blue that Walker said reminded him of the Gulf at midnight. That colour came from a paint mixer at a marine supply shop in Homer. The man had been blending custom marine paints for 30 years. He took one look at June and said, "I know exactly what colour you want. Hold on." He returned with a quart of blue so deep it looked nearly black. June painted the first stripe across the bare hull, stepped back, and knew he was right. It was the colour of water at night, the colour of sleep without dreams, the colour of safety. When the hull was finished, it looked like a different vessel entirely, a boat that wanted to live. Walker stood beside her in the yard the day she laid down the final coat. "I have been working on boats for 35 years, he said, "and I've never seen a first-time hull job that good." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The cabin came next. She stripped it down to the steel frame of the deck, pulling rotted plywood walls out in chunks, ripping away corroded wiring, disconnecting the broken propane stove with a wrench and a lot of swearing. 3 trash bags she filled with mildewed insulation, old fabric, the husks of dead spiders. When the cabin stood empty, the bare steel deck and frame baked in the bayou sun, and she could see the bones of what she was rebuilding. She framed the walls with marine plywood and cedar siding, packed closed-cell foam between the studs, and cut 2 new windows into each side, larger ones, so the cabin would fill with light. She rebuilt the roof with marine plywood and rolled roofing material, setting a small skylight in the center, positioned so a beam of sun would fall directly onto the table she planned to build. The corroded propane stove she'd torn out got replaced with a new unit, properly vented this time, a regulator, a shut-off valve, a carbon monoxide detector mounted to the cabin ceiling directly above it. She pulled every inch of old wiring and ran marine-grade cable in its place, color-coded the way Thad had taught her. On the roof she mounted a solar panel, wired down to a battery bank sealed in a compartment beneath the bunk. She mounted a 30-gallon freshwater tank with a hand pump, rigged a small composting toilet behind a curtain in the corner. Inside, she crafted furniture from cedar and pine, a built-in bench that doubled as storage, a drop-leaf table that folded flat against the wall when nobody needed it, a bed fitted snug into the bow, her exact length, with drawers underneath for clothes. Bookshelves occupied every spare inch of wall because she intended to fill that boat with books, marine engineering manuals, field guides to bayou plants and birds, a complete set of Joseph Conrad, a worn paperback of Moby Dick her mother had loved. She kept Tilden's footlocker, polished the brass corners, oiled the leather straps, and slid it beneath the bed, where she could see it each morning when she pulled the sheets tight. She kept the folded American flag and the letter inside, along with one bag from 1979, the year Tilden had bought the boat. The bag was empty now, but she liked it there, a marker of where everything began. By month 8, the houseboat had become something extraordinary. From the outside, it looked like a different vessel entirely. Deep, midnight blue hull, rebuilt cedar cabin, gleaming new hardware. But the bones were the same. Still Tilden's boat, same shape, same slip, same low, steady float on the bayou water. June hadn't transformed it, she had restored it. There's a difference, and the difference matters. The people of the bayou started to know her. Walker introduced her to fishermen and shrimpers and swamp guides who came through his shop. Curious at first, then friendly, then matter of fact, the way people get when they decide you belong. The bayou kept its own pace and its own customs. You didn't earn a welcome by being loud or asking questions. You earned it by showing up consistently, doing your work, and not making a fuss. June was very good at all three. A woman named Adelaide, who ran a small Cajun restaurant in town, started bringing gumbo in mason jars every Friday. She'd pull up to Walker's shop in a pickup truck, cooler riding in the bed, hand June a jar still warm, and refuse any money. "You eat that tonight, Cher," she'd say. Quote, _20, _. Adelaide had been Tilden Boudreau's friend, the only person in town he had let close. And June understood without asking that the gumbo was a way of honoring a promise Adelaide had made to Tilden a long time ago. A man named Buddy, who fished crawfish for a living, taught her how to set traps in the shallows near her dock, showed her how to bait them with chicken necks, where to place them along the bank, how to check them at dawn before the herons cleaned them out. Within a month, June had a steady supply, which she boiled in a big pot on her propane stove. Cayenne, lemon, and beer Walker sometimes handed her. She ate them on the deck of the houseboat, watching the sun break over the cypresses. A retired tugboat captain named Pelham, in his 80s, had known Tilden since they were boys in Cocodrie, walked down to the dock one Sunday afternoon. He stood looking at the houseboat for a long time. Then he spoke. He'd be happy. Tilden would be happy. He always said this boat had more in her than people gave her credit for. Same way he felt about himself, I expect. Pelham came back a few times after that. He wasn't much for talking. He'd sit on the dock beside June, watch the water, and tell her things about Tilden when the moment felt right. About the war, Tilden never spoke of. About the woman he had loved before Vietnam, the one who didn't wait for him to come home. About the dog Tilden named Dauphin, who lived aboard the boat with him for 14 years and was buried in the cypress grove behind the marina. June listened to every word. She wrote some of it down in the small notebook kept in the drawer beneath her bed, next to the empty 1979 canvas bag and Tilden's letter. She felt like she was assembling a record of someone she had never met. The way you might piece together a portrait from fragments. A story here, a photograph there. An empty bag with a date inked on the canvas. By the time she had been in Homer 6 months, June felt she knew Tilden Boudreau better than she had ever known her own father. June took on part-time work at Walker's shop, slip fees and shop access in trade for labor. Turned out she had a gift for it. Quick learner, quiet hands. Walker told her once that was the finest combination he'd ever stumbled across in a worker. Inside a year, she was tearing down outboard engines solo, swapping fuel lines, impellers, ignition coils, chasing electrical faults through tangled wiring with nothing but a flashlight and a multimeter, exactly the way Thad showed her. People started coming in and asking for her specifically. The young woman at Walker's place. She knows what she's doing. One evening, toward the end of May, June sat out on the deck of her houseboat and watched the sun bleed down behind the bayou. Cypress trees cut black shapes against the sky. Spanish moss drifted in the warm air. The water lay so still it mirrored everything above it. Perfect, doubled, like the boat was suspended in open sky. A heron stood on one leg in the shallows, 30 feet out. frozen, waiting on a fish that was probably never going to come. June watched the bird. After a while, the bird watched her back. They held each other's gaze for a long time, the way only solitary creatures know how to do. She thought about Tilden Boudreau, a man who came back from a war he never once spoke about and bought a boat for $400 and lived aboard it for 40 years. A man who saved silver coins and folded bills into canvas bags labeled by year, building a quiet archive of his own existence, one deposit at a time. A man with no family, no one to leave a thing to, and still he had written a letter for whoever might come after, because something in him had refused to let it all vanish into nothing. She thought about her father, a man who had gone out ember by ember after his wife died. About her mother, who had kept crayon drawings of boats tucked inside a kitchen drawer, because she had seen something in her daughter long before her daughter saw it in herself. About Thad and Walker, two brothers who had taken her seriously when most people saw a quiet kid with no direction. But she'd had direction. She had always had direction. She'd been drawing boats since her hands were big enough to grip a crayon. She'd stocked boat parts. She'd memorized catalogues cover to cover. She'd ridden a bus an hour each way to work at a marine supply store in Mississippi, where the closest salt water sat 200 miles south. Her whole life, every step, had been pulling her toward water. And now, here she was, sitting on the deck of her own houseboat in the bayou, dark blue hull, cedar cabin, an empty 1979 canvas bag, and a footlocker stowed beneath her bed. That's the thing about the directions our lives get pulled in. We don't always see where we're headed, can't always explain why we ache for what we ache for, but the pull is real, and it's ancient. If you follow it long enough, it tends to deliver you somewhere. For some people, that somewhere is a place they were born into, a family trade, a hometown, a path their parents laid out before them. For others, it's a place they have to build from scratch, a boat on a bayou, a mill beside a creek, a schoolhouse deep in the woods, a lighthouse on a cliff, a church on a dirt road in Georgia. The shape doesn't matter. What matters is whether you can stand inside it, look around, and feel something go quiet in your chest. Something that whispers, this, right here, this is where I begin. June Prescott was 19 years old and homeless. She had $10 to her name. She spent it on a rusted houseboat on a bayou in southern Louisiana. Best $10 she ever spent. If this story stirred something in you, subscribe to the channel and send it to someone who needs to hear it. Tell us in the comments, what's the place you've been pulled toward your whole life? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.